Welcome to the Harmony Economy Podcast, a discussion with thought leaders in the area of diversity and inclusion, specifically around the difficult and challenging issues that make an impact in our businesses, in our communities, and in our lives. This podcast is presented to you by GVC SHRM, and it is sponsored by the Human GPS. Today's topic is, does diversity and inclusion efforts really impact the bottom line? In our discussion today with a noted expert, Fernan, you will make the final decision as listeners. At the end of our time, there will be a poll, and we'll present the findings of that poll on our next podcast. My name is Peter Lepore, and I'll be your host for today. He's the Chief Human Resource Officer at the YMCA here in Rochester, New York. And Fernan, welcome.
Thank you.
And maybe you could tell the audience just a little bit about your background. I'm familiar with it, having had an opportunity to speak to you before.
Sure. I'm, as Peter said, I'm Chief Human Resources Officer, and I'm also Chief Diversity Officer for the YMCA of Greater Rochester. I've been in this role for 16 years. Prior to that, I was with Nestle Corporation for 2 years, and then Xerox Corporation for 14 years.
Excellent. And tell us, when we say diversity and inclusion, so many different definitions out there. Well, how do you define that at the YMCA?
I subscribe to the SHRM definition of diversity and inclusion, and that is the qualities, life experiences, personalities, education skills, competencies, and collaboration of many different types of people who are necessary to propel an organization to success.
So let's get right to the topic at hand. And let's face it, before we ask this question, I would imagine that if you go to any C-suite executive, senior executive in an organization and ask them the question, do diversity and inclusion efforts really impact our bottom line? You are going to get a positive response. They're going to say, absolutely, it's the hunt for talent. It's absolutely doing the right thing. But the question at hand today is, does it measurably impact the bottom line?
I would absolutely have to say yes, it does. And I'll give you an example. Here at the YMCA. About 10 years ago, we launched a program called Silver Sneakers, which was targeted to the active older adult, 55 years and older. And that, in the first year alone, added 2,000 new members to the organization.
Impressive.
So from a diversity standpoint, we took a step back and we looked at our diversity statement, which is it's simple for the organization, which is for all. So does this new demographic match our employee demographic? Because we want people to feel comfortable and see that there are folks like them working within the organization. So that started an attraction strategy to recruit older adults to come work for us to help run these programs, because it stood to reason if we're bringing in older adults for health and fitness, they wanted to work with older adults that live that lifestyle and would help them achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve. So 10 years later, I'll give you some statistics. We now have close to 19,000 members of that program, and our older population, which 10 years ago, for those 55 and older, it only represented 5% of our employee demographic. Today it represents 35% of our employee demographic. So we're able to achieve diversity not only on the employee front, but also on the member front.
So this was not only a diversity and inclusion effort, but also a recruiting strategy that ended up. You're talking about really not what everyone thinks of when they first think about diversity and inclusion, because you're talking about age. Right? Most people who think of diversity and inclusion are thinking about gender. They're thinking about race. They're thinking about ethnicity. Right? So are there measures, or you have some success stories around some of those common metrics?
Well, you have to look at what, and I use what's known as the pestle model, and that's where you look at the political landscape, the economic landscape, the socioeconomic landscape, the technological, legal, and environmental. So we take a snapshot in time and say, what is going on right now? So today we're seeing a seismic shift in the social front where the demographics of the Rochester area are changing. So the question that we ask ourselves in my department is, how are we meeting the needs of that shifting change? Are we remaining relevant with shifting times? So we look at the demographic of our membership, and then does that demographic reflect our members? I talked about the aging population at the top of the program. I'll give you another example where Rochester has become the epicenter of refugees and immigrants resettling into this area. So one of our branches in the Maplewood neighborhood has seen a significant increase in that area, and we've partnered with Catholic Charities to help find staff who speak the language of the new families that are settling into the Rochester area and becoming members of the Y. Because again, we want to be inclusive, and we want to also eliminate the communication barriers. So it's created a win-win opportunity for dual language individuals who have resettled into our country that now we're bringing a skill set that we absolutely need. And we're also making our members feel welcome at the same time.
So that speaks to the question that we're very often asked at the Diversity Council is around metrics. And if I understand what you're saying, and just to frame it for everyone, you've actually shown us two metrics that that anyone can use. One of them is, do we reflect our constituency, our membership?
Exactly, yes.
Right? And you use the acronym PESTLE,
Mhm.
and that's really when you're talking about our environment, are we attracting and making ourselves attracted and open to the social, political environment in which we actually exist?
Mhm.
So by measuring those, so anyone can look and measure that and then see, are we reflecting, our strategies reflecting really the environment in which we live?
Exactly.
All right, so that's very good, because that are the sort of measures that anyone can then take a look and benchmark against themselves and against the industry.
Yes.
Certainly. Okay, for those listening, they're wondering, how do I get started? Do you have any first advice for someone who's really wants to do this, but wants to put in a specific program because they're going to be accountable to their senior leadership?
Mhm.
So we'll start with that. And then the second question, are there any pitfalls, things that can come up, that common things that might happen that to look out for if you're just starting a program like this?
To answer the first part of the question, you absolutely have to first understand the nature of your business, and then look at your strategic plan and what are the objectives that you have, and then you start to tie in your diversity and inclusion strategic imperatives. So, for example, if you are looking at sales, is there a market that you're looking to penetrate? And first, you look at it at a global level, and for example, we need to increase 35% sales in our software product. So you look at, well, what demographics have we tapped into? And then you look at the demographics of the area that you're in, and you see that there's two demographics. And I'll just say, for example, the Hispanic Latino household and the Asian household are two demographics that you haven't tapped into. So how are you going to now formulate your strategy to tap into those markets? So that's one example. A pitfall that I would say is trying to be too global and trying to do an outreach to every single demographic within your neighborhood rather than focusing on one or two, because you don't want to. That's going to actually water down your efforts, and people are not going to understand your message, or the market that you're trying to attract is not going to connect with you. So I would say be careful of that pitfall of trying to please everybody and everything all at once.
Yeah, I've tried to please everybody. I've never been successful at that for now. So, well, two things we want to call, because it's going to be up to the listeners here to decide whether or not we've made the case for diversity impacting the bottom line. And I think the first thing you said was very telling and very smart from a business perspective, which is you begin with what are your business objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take a look at your diversity efforts and say, how are they aligning with the business effort? It's the business effort first, and then you're aligning your D&I strategy
Mm-hmm.
around that. That's also very smart. And the second piece of advice to new people, is, just starting with this, is rather than looking to eat the entire elephant at one time,
Mm-hmm.
you're really going to say, let's start small. Let's start with something manageable and not try to be too global, because if you are trying to be all things to all people, what you'll end up is nothing to everybody.
Exactly. And if you take that approach, and if it works, then you have a best practice that you could expand to other markets as well.
Very good. So that's another bit of it's a metric. So you have a best practice that you can then benchmark against other areas as you continue to expand and get better at what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Fernan, anything you'd like to tell us about the why before we go? It's a shameless opportunity to plug.
Oh, sure. This is our 165th anniversary in the Rochester area. We are building a new location, which is going to be at the crossroads of the city, Pittsford, and Brighton. It's going to be known as a regional campus, and it's going to be one of the largest YMCAs in North America. And we're hoping that people come on out and check it out when it opens up in September of 2019.
Well, that sounds like an invitation worth taking up on. Fernan Sapero, thank you. I believe that you have made the case for does it impact the bottom line in our business? But that's up to you all to decide. Take the poll right now. You'll see the opportunity to poll yes or no. Did Fernan make the case? And we'll share more with you in the next of our series at the Harmony Economy. This is Peter Lepore saying thank you to GVC Shoreham and to our sponsor, the Human GPS. Navigate success.